video, I'm going to be talking about world building. For those of you writing nonfiction or literary fiction, this applies to you every bit as much as it applies to a science fiction writer or a romance writer, because the world that we create is the one that our readers are going to experience with the characters. World building means the world that those characters live in, no matter what world it is. Maybe you're like, that's great, and I'm writing a story, but where do I start? Then this video is definitely for you, because it's World Building 101, what to include, what not to include. And if I were to do the video in one short little sentence, I would say everything matters and nothing matters. Yep, that's great. Video over. Just kidding. Okay, so you have to know the blueprint of all the different parts of your world, but you don't have to include all of those elements into your story. So how much of the world building you include is going to be determined by the genre that you write and the type of story you want to tell. So a fantasy that focuses on the characters is not going to talk about the world as much as a fantasy that is an epic fantasy, because those deal with war and clashes and stories about the journey. So even in that genre is going to be very different. So for you, you just need to determine what genre you're writing, what age bracket you're writing for, and then what type of story do you want to tell. Are you telling the story of a person, a group of people, a culture, a world, or are you telling the story of a journey? Independence Day is not about Will Smith's character. It's about the aliens that come and fighting off the aliens, right? That's the journey. But that journey includes a lot of world building because it's about the world. So it depends on what you're writing. So, but as far as determining what to include, you start with the biggest thing, literally, and then just sort of whittle it down to the smaller things or the things that you can't even see with your eyes. So if you're writing a science fiction or a fantasy, you're going to want to include worlds and even solar systems and possibly universes. With DC, it's called the DC universe for a reason. I've mentioned before that I am a Batman fan, so there. All right, I'm kind of making fun of myself. Hopefully you guys are too, but nicely. Okay, so it's called the DC Universe. They go from planet to planet and they do all kinds of weird things. Comic books are known for being weird. Fantastically weird, if you ask me, but weird nonetheless. So you're gonna wanna start with your worlds and your solar systems and things like that, so space. And then you're gonna wanna move in and say, okay, so what on my world matters? The geography, is it mostly water? Is it mostly land? Is there one continent? Are there tons of little islands? What matters for my story? Because something on the other side of the world may not even come up in your story, or maybe your story is only about this section and you just focus on this section, or maybe your book is about the world as a whole. So you need to know what your end goal is in this. From there, you want to focus on the countries that matter, the geography within the country, the climate within the country, and the cultures within the countries. That could include religion or disclude religion. It could include government or disclude. I think I'm saying that correctly. If it's not disclude, it's okay. Be quiet. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear. So it could either include or not include religion, politics. When deciding about the world, you also have to decide what it looks like, not just geographically, but it's called flora and fauna, so the plants and the animals. Are you going to include them in your story? Are you just going to include horses because it's a wild, wild west and that's all that matters? Are you in the jungle and you're just going to include big old cats? So it's totally up to you, depending on the type of story you want to write. So from there, you want to look at your characters and their individual cultures, their family cultures. I don't know if any of you out there have gone to college and you room with your roommates for the first time, and you're pretty sure they're just doing the dishes wrong. Have you ever experienced that where no, this is how we do this. This is how we do the dishes. This is how we cook that. You make enchiladas and you chop them up in the pan. Who just chops up enchiladas? You're supposed to bake the enchiladas. Have you ever experienced that where you're pretty sure the other person just does it wrong? Here's why. Because you have a family culture. You grow up understanding the world and learning about the world through the lens of your family, how your parents communicate with you, what they teach you, the religion they give you, the rules they give you, just the back and forth dialogue. Even you learn about how the world functions, and you come to accept what's quote normal and what's not normal. So essentially, we're indoctrinating our kids. I do it all the time, and we're teaching them what's normal. Cool. So there's the family culture, the culture at large, which also indoctrinates people, right? The school systems, that's what they do. Raise your hand, don't slap your neighbor, don't throw things. That's what the school systems are designed to do. So depending on what you're writing, that might be part of it. So how do you determine what matters? Okay, this is where I came in earlier and I said all of it and none of it. All of it matters. Like I said, you need a blueprint of all of it, but maybe none of it is important for your story. If you're writing a memoir and your story is about this experience you had one time, it might be a story about things that are 100% internal. And you never mention where you are. There's a play, The World is never talked about. That was a play where the world didn't matter as much as the emotion. So you need to ask yourself again what your end goal is, and you need to jot things down. Now, when you are writing a story, you do not include everything you can ever include. I've seen writers who want to go so detailed with their world that they sort of leave people behind. Have you heard the expression of you can't see the forest for the trees? This is an example of this. They were so hyper focused on the details that it was almost like they had their nose up to a tree and they were analyzing the bark because they were excited about the details of their story. That's great, but your plot and your character arcs and what's going to pull the readers along is not the bark on the trees. It's the forest. It's the scope of how it all ties together. You are getting them from here to here, and if you are still standing here staring at the bark, then you're never going to get your readers here. They're going to stop reading a long time before they get here. There is a famous writer, and I will not say his name, and I really liked his books, but I have really there's two actually. They're both really famous writers. Their world building was so much that I was like, oh, can somebody do something with it? Can you stop telling me about the cool stuff that exists and just somebody throw it out the window or slap somebody with it or flush it down? Can you do something with it? Can it exist for a purpose, please? But I don't like 3 paragraphs of trying to find the soap in the dark. I get it. It's dark. Person's in a cave. Give him the dang soap. Give him soap. Anyway, so decide the details that matter, that actually carry you from here to here, and then include those. And typically, that's not going to be all of those things. It's not going to be 10 things. It's not going to, maybe you never talk about the oceans because it doesn't come up. Maybe you're writing an epic journey that is on the ocean, like Jaws or The Perfect Storm or something like that. And so you never really talk about the land, but you focus on the ocean. So just remember what elements matter and then include those. And then the way to really tie it all together is to drop hints about it and reminders as you go throughout the book. Mention that. So if you're putting together a specific culture and it is a culture of another world, or it is the culture of another country other than the country where you're publishing your book, then you're going to want to remind the audience of what they're looking at, because their brains are going to go back to kind of their default setting. Whatever their familiar culture is, they're going to sort of default back to that. Go home, write that scene, rewrite that scene if you have to, and don't forget to click like and subscribe so you don't miss anything, because I am going to help you go from being a writer to being a best-selling author.